Andre, good to see you. Normally these kind of podcasts start with some music or something. Maybe you can bring that next time. But today we got a lot to talk about. So we're just going to
Yes,
get into it.
yeah, good stuff to talk about today.
I know we're talking to men and they don't have a lot of time, so we're just gonna move, and we want to talk about talking a little bit. I know we talked about that last week, but this is just such a huge issue. The Bible stresses the importance of everyday communication in some pretty powerful ways. What are some images that stand out to you in terms of how important talking is from the Bible?
Yeah, I mean, it's obvious. The first one that comes to mind is the actual like weapon that is in your mouth. Like this tongue. If we think even of James and Proverbs, all these different ways the Bible talks about the tongue, it can really cause a lot of destruction in your life. This weapon in your mouth.
Yeah, like a fire, James calls it, a sword thrust, Proverbs calls it. It's like a steering wheel. I think the Bible doesn't use that exact image. It uses rudder, but it's a steering wheel in that it influences the direction of your entire life. It is like medicine in that it can heal. It's a means of grace is the big one to me, that God has undeserved kindness that he wants to give people. And it's almost like our everyday speech is the channel through which God pours out his grace on others. So if there's one area in your life that impacts every area of your life, you obviously want to get better at it. And this is definitely one area that influences every area in our families. And unfortunately, a lot of us as dads aren't very good at it. And as we talk about this, even we're men who believe in the gospel, and we're thankful for God's forgiveness. And so we're not experts, but we definitely know that this is an area in our families that we want to become better and better at. And so because God's forgiven us, and because we have the Holy Spirit in us, we like to talk about talking and how we can talk in ways that really are healing, bring healing, and strengthen our families. And we've been coming at this in a little bit of a negative way, asking the question, what does it look like to be a bad communicator? If you were going to draw a picture of a dad who is a bad communicator, what would that dad look like?
Yeah, I mean, I like thinking in pictures, so this is helpful because Proverbs helps us to see that someone that's not a good listener. This is a dad that is a know-it-all. This is someone that doesn't have any filters. He just speaks without thinking about it. When there's a conversation, he just dominates the conversation. There's no room for other people to say stuff. And even manipulation, using your speech in a way that to only get what you want, so you can use your words to manipulate your children and your family. And of course, being critical, just condemning people, and then impatient, so there's a lot of negative things that actually in a picture that comes with this kinds of speech.
Yeah, that's so helpful. Proverbs talks about the babbler quite a bit, the guy who just opens his mouth and things come out. He talks about the man who answers a matter before he hears it. It's folly and shame to him. So a bad communicator doesn't listen. A lot of us as dads are not good listeners. We're problem solvers, and we solve problems that don't even exist because we're not listening to the actual issue. We sometimes are just know-it-alls. Proverbs 12:15 talks about the guy who's wise in his own eyes. And many of us dads, unfortunately, feel like we're the smartest person in the room, at least when we're in our families, and we talk like it. We're know-it-alls. We also are people who don't ask for help sometimes. Proverbs 15:12 talks about the guy who he won't admit actually that he doesn't know. And some of us dads, we have the wrong perception of leadership, and we think leadership is never showing weakness. And so even though our whole family knows we don't know, we act like we know. The dad who hates being corrected. There's the dad who is so proud that nobody can ever correct him in his everyday talk. And that is a bad communication. If a guy is proud, he's going to be a bad communicator. And so let's press home on this a little bit and think about illustrations. What are some what are some very specific illustrations of this kind of negative, sickening speech in the family?
Yeah. Well, if I think of someone who's not a good listener, as Proverbs talks about, let's say something happens, your child walks across the room, he drops the glass and the glass breaks. In your mind, you're going to critique him, you're going to criticize him. He wants to maybe explain what happened. Maybe there's a legitimate reason why it slipped and fell, but you're condemning already and you're lashing out with your words, and you didn't even give a chance to hear what happened from your child.
Mm, mm. Yeah, for sure. Another I think of is just belittling speech that Proverbs talks about. And that's the kind of speech where you're basically telling your child, be little. And it sounds terrible that a man would do this to his own kids, but there are many opportunities throughout the day to make fun of your kids. You're actually not joking in ways that strengthen them, but you're joking in ways that make them look stupid or feel stupid. They're not as fast a runner as you. Why can't you run quickly? They cry about something. What's wrong with you? Are you a crybaby? And we're not thinking about, is this speech helping them? We're actually just demeaning them.
Yeah, I also think of a dad that's, as we talk about this know-it-all kind of dad. So, I mean, this is a guy that maybe he's never even done something in the kitchen, but now he's got all the 10 opinions about how this should be done. Oh, you're doing this wrong. You're doing that wrong. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? Kind of thing. Or maybe you're even starting a new sport. All of a sudden, you're the expert on this sport. You've never done it yourself, but you're telling this guy, no, you're doing this wrong. You should run this way. You should hold it that way. And it just weighs down on your kids or something like that.
Yeah, it's like you're putting little weights on them as they're trying to walk through life and burdens. The correct all the time dad is a problem too. Of course, there's times to correct, especially when it comes to biblical principle. But some guys, they just have so many opinions about absolutely everything. And it's not just an opinion in the home. Their opinion is right about where the remote control goes, about how you roll the toilet paper, about the way that toothpaste is supposed to come out of the toothpaste container. And they're not just keeping those opinions inside. Those opinions are law in their family.
Yeah, I think the Proverbs says the tongue of the wise commends knowledge, but the mouths of the fools pour out folly. So even as dads, they make all these rules. Maybe, you should do it this way, do it that way. There's all these rules. And then the kids can't keep up with all these rules. It's just too overwhelming. And the dad is just being tough on them when they can't do it the way he likes it to be done.
Yeah, I wrote down some signs that you might be a proud dad in terms of the way that you speak. One, you are the most fascinating person you know. You often say to yourself, if only people just did what I wanted. You find yourself complaining in the family a lot. You hate it when other people are better than you. You're often bored when people talk to you. You rarely say, I don't know. You often say to yourself, I don't understand how people could be that dumb. The one problem with the way we speak so often is we become so used to it that we don't even stop and evaluate whether it honors God and what it reveals about our heart. And so we're just trying to get at, we're just trying to help ourselves and others look at the way you speak, because your speech has tremendous power.
Yes. I recently we were working in the garden, so I had to confess this even to my son. So I'm working in the garden. He's just trying to help me. He's just trying to be a good trooper, coming alongside his dad and help as much as he can. But the way he was doing stuff made it hard for me to do what I had to do. And that, so I could see the annoyance coming out of my voice in the way I spoke with him. And that was an opportunity to stop and slow down and evaluate and even talk to him and say, please forgive me and things like that.
Yeah. So important. Our words, we really, they don't belong to us. We are servants of the King. And so our words need to be the words that he wants us to speak, and even really the tone of our speech. So often, unfortunately, what James tells us we're trying to do with our words is get people to do things exactly the way we like them to do them. And instead, we need to be thinking about how do our words minister God's grace to others. Now, it's one thing to identify a problem, obviously, and that's actually a big thing. Before you can change, you need to know you have a problem. But what next if you're trying to help a guy or just change yourself in terms of your everyday speech? What are some basic steps to really moving forward?
Yeah, I think you got to resist the temptation to always make excuses. Own up to it. If you're a guy that does this, own up to it. Don't make excuses. And then call it what God calls it. If it's sin, it's sin. Let's not pretend, And if only once we recognize something is sin, that's hopeful, because then we can look to the solution to that sin.
Yeah, it's amazing how hard it is not to make excuses, though. We've been doing it since we're like 2 or 3. And especially when it comes to the way we speak, this is just the way I am, Or man, if people weren't so dumb around me, I wouldn't be saying such bad things. But we need to realize God holds us accountable for every word, and holds us accountable for the way that we speak in our home. We also have to obviously think about the heart. That's the great thing about speech. Say something so I can see you, because the way we speak on a regular basis does reveal something about our hearts. And so we've got to ask, if I am constantly complaining, what does that say about my heart? If I am manipulating people to get what I want and yelling, actually, if I'm yelling, what does that say about my heart? It says something big about my heart. If I'm belittling, what does that say about my heart? Look for patterns. You've developed habits of speech over the years.
Yeah, I think that's a big one. I think a lot of times, if we really slow down and evaluate, we'll start to recognize there's certain ways of patterns in our lives that are actually pretty astonishing. How we defer and default to a certain way of speech in a certain situation without even thinking about it.
Yes, and then it hurts to do this, because we like to think of ourselves as pretty awesome, and when we look at the way we're speaking, it often reveals a very different picture of ourselves, a pretty broken sinner many times, if you call it for what it is. But that's where there's hope. There's a savior for sinners, sinners who repent. And so we need to look for patterns, call it for what it is, and then we need to work at putting off and putting on. Obviously, we need to pray for the Spirit to change us from the heart, but we need to do the hard work of, okay, what specifically do I need to change in my habits of speech? What do I need to put off? And what kinds of things can I say instead? And then actively seek to communicate in that way in our families. Now
that gives me so much hope.
Yeah, for sure. There is hope. We can change as Christians, and that change is going to have a powerful influence on our families. Now let's take one of these issues as just an example, and that's the issue of being constantly critical. Why is that a sin? Well, what is it? What do we mean when we talk about being critical? Do we mean correcting people, or what does it mean to be critical, and why is it a sin?
Yeah, I think, well, at the core of it, I think we're not loving our neighbor as ourselves, so if we just have to be flatlining it, you're just thinking you're judging others and thinking you're more important than other people, and you're willing to say stuff that is harmful and hurtful and critical of them.
Yeah, so critical isn't identifying sin and talking in a loving way about sin. So when we talk about being critical, we're not talking about we need to suddenly close our eyes to the reality of sin in our families and always just walk around saying everybody's awesome all the time. When we talk about being critical, we're talking, we know what we mean, really. I think most guys, we're talking about a proud heart that is not really concerned so much about biblical principle, but concerned about preference, and is able to see the speck in other people's eyes while we've got massive logs in our own eyes that we're not willing to do something about. And what are some common excuses that people give for this kind of critical speech?
Yeah, I think we've kind of mentioned it already a little bit, but it's like, I want to just help, I think I know better, so I just want to help you see something you're doing wrong, know? And so you think that's helpful, but it's actually not helpful.
Yes, exactly. What we need to look for maybe as a symptom in our family, because it's true, we do need to correct as dads, we are teachers, but we need to look at the impact our correction has on our children in terms of, are our children discouraged, or are our children angry? That is a symptom sometimes. Of course, they're sinners, so they can get angry and discouraged on their own, and we need to teach them how to take correction. But we also need to own up to the fact that a lot of times the way that we deal with a real problem can make it harder for our children to respond in a God-honoring way. So Paul says to dads, don't provoke your children. That means we can provoke them. And one of the ways we provoke them is by communicating about real problems and non-problems in a unkind, ungracious, not gentle way. What's going on in the heart of a critical person?
Yeah, I think this is real negative attitude that really seeks to condemn. So even if you think about stuff like jealousy and envy, you know, like it's really brewing inside the heart when I look at someone else and I don't have what they have, or and all of a sudden it's easy for me to be critical of them because I want what they have. And so the heart is not truly satisfied with the gospel and what Christ has done for them.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's a great insight to bring the gospel back into this, because what does it reveal about what I believe about myself when I'm critical? One thing it might reveal is that I don't know what a great sinner I am. And another thing it might reveal is I don't know how loved by God I am. And so I might have the attitude of Jesus as constantly critical of me and not loving me. And so I'm kind of imitating a false Jesus there. Jesus, the gospel says that you are a worse sinner than you can ever imagine, and you're more loved by God than you can possibly begin to conceive. And so sometimes when we're critical, we're deluded. We think we're better than we are, or we don't realize how loved by God we are. Now, what do we need to put on in the place of a critical spirit or a critical speech?
Yeah, I mean, Ephesians 4:29 says, let no corrupting talk come out of your mouth, but only as such is good for building up, as fits the occasion, that you may get great grace to those who hear. So what can I do to build someone else up? So that's an easy one, is like, what can I do to make this person just know that I'm thankful for them, they're doing a good job, you know, I appreciate them. I love them. I'm thankful they're my children, you know. There's so many ways we can use words to build others up.
Yes. Is this the right time? Is this the right word? Is this the right tone? Those are some questions that we definitely want to be asking. Am I motivated by the right motivation right now? Is it honestly love for the people around me, or is it I just want to get my way? And have I done the hard work of encouraging? So one of the things that all of us, I think, are aware of is when somebody rebukes us, it's hard to take. And obviously, if we're wise, we need to learn to take correction well, but most of our kids aren't wise, and we need to teach them wisdom. And one way we can help them take correction well is by remembering it's hard for them, just like it's hard for us. And they'll often hear it louder than we mean it. And so one way to help them hear it in a more appropriate way is by doing a lot of encouraging, so they know that you're for them. Because if they doubt that you're really for them, when you correct them, it's going to be much more tempting for them to respond in anger. It's easier to take correction from somebody you know is for you.
Yeah, you're going to see it immediately in your kid's response. So if they become defensive when you're just trying to lovingly point out something, it's probably because you haven't done that work of showing them you're for them and this is for their good, and you're just trying to come alongside them and help them see something from a biblical perspective. And if you've done that work, then, I mean, that conversation usually goes pretty well. Yeah. But if you're just diving in there to correct without doing the work of loving and edifying and encouraging, then it's going to typically respond a defensive response or something like, or tears in a way that makes them feel angry or disappointed and things like that.
Yeah, sometimes people think, oh, it's obvious I'm for them. Look at me. Look at all I do. But it's not always obvious. Get that stuff out of your heart, onto your lips, and out your mouth, so that your kids can hear it and really know it. And this is a huge issue, obviously, the way we talk. And if we want to really move our families forward, one of the key areas that we can work on is putting off critical speech, putting on grace-giving speech, and becoming men who use their words for the glory of God and the good of their family. So I'm praying for you. I know you're praying for me. And let's keep pursuing being agents of God's grace in our families through our speech. Thanks, Andre.
Amen. Thank you, brother.
Love being with you.
Have a wonderful day.
Yeah, you too. Bye.